Hello and welcome to the Slumbering Sloth Book Nook, a podcast about all things books, publishing and more. My name is Emma and today my guest is Rebecca Fortuin. Rebecca is an audiobook editor at Avon Books and HQ Stories. Now on with the show. Hello Rebecca, hello.
Hello.
Thank you for coming on today.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me.
That's absolutely fine. So you do quite a different job compared to a lot of my other people I've spoken to. So you specialise in audio books, don't you? Your job.
I do indeed. Yes, I'm the audio editor for HarperCollins and I look after their Avon and HQ divisions.
Very awesome. Okay, so can you tell us what you do in your role?
It's quite hard to explain. It's a bit of a jack of all trades role. So I always say there's three parts to my role. So the main part and the most important part is obviously looking after the audiobook recordings in themselves. And you put on many different hats when you're doing this. So the first thing is assigning to different studios, making sure we're matching each book with the right studio. For example, we consider, is the author going to read? Where's the most best available location for the author to read from? We look at what narrators we have listed with each studio, which voices would match each book, and which partners we'll be working with for each audiobook recording. So that's the first part. Then we get on to the more fun part, which is casting. And you're looking at stuff like how many voices is in a book. The main audiobook recordings will have one or two voices, depending on perspectives and narratives. Some go to 3, 4. Very occasionally, you can have up to 40 voices.
Wow.
On an audiobook, which is completely bonkers, but a lot of fun to do. We're also looking at the type of voice. So is there a particular region that the characters are from? Is there a particular gender? Is there a particular age? It's all factoring that into making sure that the voice of the audio really matches the voice of the book. And then just overseeing all the sort of production side of it, making sure each studio knows exactly when they need to record, making sure they've got the final manuscript, making sure the actors are aware which studio they're going to, giving them plenty of time to prep the work, and ensuring all the files are coming in with plenty of time to then send out to our retailers. So that's the first part of the job and the most important and main part of it. The second part of the job is working very closely with our marketing teams and our editors to identify which audiobooks are the focus for the division, which we can promote on our digital channels, which ones work best in audio, so they're going to be the main driver for audio, and tying into all their fantastic campaigns and seeing how we can amplify the print and the ebook editions using the audio, and figuring out cool little things that we can do with the audio that just helps promote all of the editions. And then the final part is the bigger picture stuff. And this is a lot of creative brainstorms. It's a lot of being very flexible where the audio market is going. We're looking at different initiatives to make audio more accessible, more inclusive, and just bringing it to new horizons, because it's the fastest growing sector of publishing. It's constantly adapting because it's very technological based, and there's all these new things that you can try out all the time. So yeah, I do love the brainstorming things. It's longer planned and it's much more slow moving than the other parts, but it uses a very different part of your brain and it's a lot of fun to do.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of problem solving as well. That obviously you have to sort of deal with so much stuff, don't you? Because it's quite a varied role.
It is. It's very varied. You will never know exactly how each week will pan out. So last week I was majority in the studio. I was looking after 2 recordings. One we had a well-known narrator, and one we had an author narrator who was actually narrating in her third language. So
Wow.
She didn't speak English as her first language. She didn't speak English as her second language. She spoke English as her third language. And she still did an incredible job. And I could not even attempt an audiobook, barely in my own language, let alone my third language.
Yeah.
I don't speak any other language. But then this week I'm mainly in the office doing a lot of the admin side, so making sure that our casting for September is all up to date, and checking manuscripts and checking deadlines and attending meetings, and yeah, just talking about stuff that's not coming out for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Oh, that's all the stuff coming up, which is quite exciting.
Yeah, we're currently working on the October, September titles, which is the big one. Obviously, we've got Super Thursday in October. Every publisher has got tons of books coming out in this period. So yeah, it's really, really big titles at the moment.
I bet you're a busy bee then at the moment.
Yeah, I'm very busy. I've also got a holiday coming up, and I've got
Oh.
recordings the day before I go on holiday and recordings the day I come back from holiday. So I planned that one well.
Oh, definitely, most definitely. So, in your role, what would you say the key skills are for your job and what you've sort of learned in your role?
I think the first thing is you have to be organised. It was actually the one thing that was mentioned on the application I saw when I first got into audio. You are doing so many books in a year. You've got to really be on top of it and really be on track of it. An average sort of print editor, depending on what division they're in, they probably do about between 5 and 10 books in a year. Your average audio book editor is going to do about 100 minimum. So it's a much shorter turnaround in some aspects, which is why we do a lot more in one year. But you're representing, so I'm representing 2 divisions, and I think each division has, I would say, probably 8 editors apiece.
Yeah.
So I'm representing 16 book lists essentially. So yeah, you do have to be really organized, and you have to be really proactive as well, because audio is something that's relatively new. Not a lot of the authors know much about the audio process. A lot of publishing houses are also learning and adapting to the best ways of doing audio practices. So you've got to be very proactive in knowing that people aren't always going to know exactly the next step, or they're not going to always naturally approach you with the manuscript on the time that you need it for, because they don't know that part of the process, and it's making sure that you're thinking one step ahead. So yeah, organization definitely, and being flexible and being proactive is another great skill to have. But the one I always say is passion. And I'm sure this applies to really any part of publishing, but you've really got to love it.
Yes.
You can't just go into an interview and, you know, make some nods and some hums, but mainly be thinking, I'm just getting this as a gateway into the print books. And you got to really, really love it, because on some weeks you're going to be running around like a headless chicken, and it's bonkers and it's mad and it's absolutely fantastic. And then other weeks are going to be a bit slower, and you've got to be somebody who loves that chaos and loves that organized chaos and can just move with the flow and get really excited about being in the studio and having that ear for, what if we did this? What if we did that little tweak? What if we did a slight sound effect on this part of the text? What if we went with this narrator, which is a bit of a curveball? And just, having that passion for just the new technologies and trying new things, because it's such a young part of the industry that you need champions who just push it further and will build it into something that's really fantastic.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. As you said, it's just being very organised, and it's just sort of being, as you said, passionate for it, because I've spoken to so many people that work in publishing, but it's no different regardless, because everyone loves books, don't they? At the end of the day, it's the reading aspect, no matter if you're listening to it or physically reading.
And you have to do a lot of reading for
Oh,
audio.
yes.
I actually read a lot more than I listen, because I'm reading for acquisitions, I'm reading for casting, I'm reading edits ahead of recordings to make sure, is there something in the book that needs to be tweaked for audio? So I don't get to listen until it's the leisure time or I'm in the studio. So yeah, reading. Yeah, you've got to love reading. If you don't love reading, if you struggle with it, audio probably isn't the way into publishing for you.
Definitely, and as you said, it's balancing your reading time with everything else, and
Yep.
yes, you sound.
A lot of reading on the commute is a really effective way. So
It is.
Commute from outside of London so that you have longer to read.
I know. I think I get through more of my books when I'm reading here and there. So yeah, no, that's great. So we talked a bit about it before. So audio was still quite a young industry in terms of the publishing sphere. and obviously it's growing massively, and as audiobook sales have rocketed, haven't they? Because life's getting busier and more people want to listen on their commute and stuff like that. So where do you see the future of audiobooks going? Because obviously we've got a lot of things like obviously the big companies sort of producing their own audio apps and stuff. Where do you see it sort of in the future progressing?
I think wherever I see it going, it's going to go even further. Yeah, there's just so many opportunities. So the thing at the moment is you've got very distinctive between podcasts and audiobooks. And podcasts are mad and they're creative and they're written for the audio format. And they get millions and millions of people listening, particularly to the larger podcasts, stuff like Law, Welcome to Night Vale, etc. Whereas audiobooks, they're an adaptation of an existing text or an adaptation of something that was written for print form. And even though the audio is always slightly different because it's kind of like a film adaptation, you're taking the essence and the message of the story, but you're adapting it to a new medium. You're still limited by the realms of the print because you don't want to take away too much from the original story. You want to honor it in the audio. So what I'm really excited about is this sort of merging of audiobooks and podcasts and creating sort of longer form storied content that is written for audio. And there's so many different ways that you can do this. So HQ, one of the divisions I work with, launched their first audio original last year called 7 Days of Sound Meditation. And it's this fantastic blend of a podcast and a non-fiction book. So it's by a guy called Leo Consenli, who discovered sound meditation as a way to combat stress in living in a modern world. And the first part of the audio original is his own story, which reads kind of like a non-fiction audiobook. And then the second part is 7 different meditations which are recorded in 3D sound, and that's more of like the podcast side, and you get this beautiful, really immersive audiobook, which is great to listen to before bed because I am a terrible sleeper. But it's something that, you know, it could have worked as a book format and it could have worked as a podcast format, but it works so much better blending the two together. It's just a really fantastic experience. And I think things like that is just going to continue growing and growing. There's a new company called Tangible. I want to say Tangible Reality. I might have got that wrong.
It's okay, don't worry.
And they did this, they did a podcast based, say a podcast, it was more like an immersive story experience of Macbeth. And they recorded it in a castle and they did completely binaural sounds, like a completely 3D audio. And it's not the play just read out loud, it's the play fully immersive and fully experienced. And yeah, it's this blending of existing mediums and this idea of creating a product purely from an audio angle and really utilizing the strengths of the media. That's what I'm really excited about. And as this is explored a lot more, you're going to have so much more inclusion and accessibility to listeners who can't access print and reading for whatever reason that may be, and something that's more reflective of, you know, the talent and the diversity of our country.
No, that's great, because obviously it's great the variety of what audiobooks can do for everybody. And obviously, I don't know if you've seen these sort of decision programs on Netflix. Obviously, they've been doing like those choose your own adventure kind of ones, and like those kind of ones you click and then it will do the story. Do you think that would be a one that it might go with at some stage, like a very interactive experience, kind of?
Yeah, definitely a possibility. I think the main thing would be just getting that consumer format down and making sure it's something that's really accessible and something that people can access quite easily. But there are sort of already experiments in that area. There's a fantastic audiobook company called Owlfield, who actually, no, they've done a sort of choose your own adventure. I'm not too sure how the format works. I think it's kind of a choose your own adventure, but it's kind of a guided choose your own adventure. And again, that's really immersive, and you sort of get the sense that you're controlling the story, but it's kind of going one way. And I think if you get sort of that pattern down, whether it's coming through one of those smart speakers or whether it's something that you can access on your phone, you can click a link and it diverts the track to another track. It's definitely a possibility. I think somebody just needs to crack something that's really easy for people to use, and I think that's the main thing. It's like easy usage, because technology is advancing all the time, but the main thing is that it's easy for people to use, otherwise it's kind of redundant.
You've lost it then, basically, if you can't get everybody to use it in that way.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so much entertainment going on at the moment that if you can't engage with it quickly, why invest your time in something that's really clunky to use when you can do something else which is a lot smoother and you'll get way more entertainment out of it?
Yeah, because I remember those old audiobooks you used to get on CD-ROM and like tape and stuff, and it's just sort of evolved now into some, like, you can have a library of audiobooks now, can't you, just on your device?
You can, and a lot of people don't know that. So if you're assigned to your library, you can access a lot of library suppliers. They have their own apps, so you can borrow, she says in quotation marks, audiobooks on your phone and access them. So I think what works is you can't physically download them onto your phone itself, but you can access them from the app, which is a really great way of listening to audiobooks if you can't afford them, because for a lot of people, some audiobooks can be more expensive than paperbacks. Not all. Certain companies have higher price ranges than others. But yeah, it's a really great way to experiment with audio as well and try stuff out before you commit to buying or commit to a subscription service.
Exactly. Because I found last year when I was reading some of my classic texts, my course, that I couldn't sort of get through the book, the language and stuff, and when I was using audiobooks to help me read with the voices, and it really helped get the story down, the atmosphere. It really was fantastic, and I love audiobooks ever since now, so it's been a really good way to help everybody sort of learn as well.
Yeah, and I think classics is a really great example of that, because a lot of things with classics is the story often gets lost in sort of superfluous description, and it's very of like the time eras it's in. Particularly Charles Dickens, who was paid by the word, so he put in extra words to get paid more.
Oh, his sentence is very long.
Yeah, he has extremely long sentences and a lot of description, which is completely irrelevant. So yeah, no, definitely, and listening to it on audio means you can do it whilst you're doing other things.
Yes, I've definitely done that.
I mean, I was a procrastinating student. I would literally do anything but study. So you can trick yourself into studying. You can listen to audiobooks whilst tidying your room or frantically stress washing your dishes. And it's stuff like as well, like when you're traveling places, or you're relaxing in bed. It's you can just listen to it all the time. It's fantastic.
That's great. Well, thanks for that highlight on the future, hopefully, of audiobooks. That'll be really interesting to see what happens in the next couple of years. I don't think it's too far off. I think it's getting quite close, wouldn't you say?
I would say, I mean, the stuff that I've been working on presently, like 2 years ago when I started in audio, I wouldn't have thought would have been a reality so soon, which is why I'm hesitant to say anything, because I know like it's going to be outdated within a couple of months. It's there's so much energy behind audio. There are so many fantastic startups. I mean, the sky's the limit. Well, the budget's the limit, really.
Definitely.
There's an appetite out there, and I think there's so many risks to take. There are so many things to explore. It could really go anywhere.
That's exciting. Very exciting. So that's good to know. So turning a little bit back to sort of your role, and what would you give in terms of advice to someone who is like looking to work in audiobook publishing? What would you say like your first bit of advice would be?
This is always a question that I struggle with.
I know. Because yes, it happens for a lot of people.
The way I got into publishing is very different to a lot of people who have their very thought out, considered publishing plans, which are fantastic. And It definitely works, and it's fantastic to have ambition. It's fantastic to know where you are going from such a young age. I had no idea where I was going, and I've kind of fallen into audio. Um, so, I mean, things that I would say about my experience, which I can think can translate into anyone else's experience, is yeah, number one, like I mentioned before, be passionate, but don't don't assume that people know that you're passionate, because everybody who works in publishing does so because they love books and they love stories and they're passionate to work in publishing, and everybody who wants to get into it is passionate. But if you don't show that passion in interviews, or when you're on work experience, when you're doing a paid internship, um, it could be easily misconstrued that, you're not as passionate as the rest of them. So I think make sure your passion is showing all the time, and engage people in stuff that you're really interested in. Like, bring examples of stuff that you love to interviews. Work in books that you really love. Just let your passion show, and don't worry about like coming across as too much. I don't think you can be too much. Like, I see people who light up when they talk about certain books and certain projects they work on. I know that I light up when I talk about audio, and it's so engaging and it's so appealing. And that's the kind of person you want to work with. You want to work with somebody who just loves it so much that they just completely light up when they talk about it. What else I would say is find your niche, and it doesn't have to be something massive, and it doesn't have to be something that you necessarily wouldn't consider as a niche, but it has to be something that's true to you and sort of defines you as something that's different, somebody who's going to take publishing to the next level, because everybody in publishing now represents how publishing is now. Nobody wants to hire people who can do publishing now. They want to hire people who can take publishing to the next level, and it's finding whatever that advantage is that you can work into your interviews, or you can present to potential job interviews. So for me, it was YouTube. I am a massive fan of the YouTube community. I've been on YouTube for about 10 years now. I've watched whole careers rise and fall. I know all about the culture and the fandom surrounding it. I could talk like for hours just on the intricacies of YouTube and like the highlights and the lowlights. And I worked that into my interview. I talked about Dan and Phil's 3D audio advert that Penguin had created to advertise their book. And I talked about other YouTuber books that I really loved. And that ended up being really beneficial to my first audiobook team, because nobody knew what YouTube was. Nobody understood, YouTube fans. Nobody realized that these books could do really well in audio. So I actually got to lead, whilst being supervised, on both Connie Glynn's Rosewood Chronicles and Dodie's slash memoir slash life advice Secrets of the Mad. And with both cases, I knew their audiences so well, and I knew tiny little tweaks that we could do for both of them that would really appeal to their listeners. And they both did phenomenally well, and the audiences absolutely loved them, and both the authors were very happy with the product. And it was so nice because it was so authentic for me that I was able to create a project that everybody was happy with. Had it been left to one of the older editors, they would have done a fantastic job. It just wouldn't have had that nuance to it, because they didn't understand that market in the same way that I don't really understand very heavy non-fiction titles, which is why it's dealt with another editor. So yeah, it's finding that niche to make this. But one, makes you stand out, but two, is commercially beneficial for the team, and three, brings publishing to that next level. Because you can teach anybody the basic skills. You can teach everyone how to do metadata and admin, how to look at a book logistically, how to cast, how to record. You can teach everybody the basic skills, but you can't teach passion, and you can't teach that sort of new creative outlook and that very different approach to something that's been done and dusted for many, many years now.
Oh, that's great. That's a great bit of advice. Thank you so much for
giving
it some words of wisdom, because I love words of wisdom on the show. I think a lot of people know that by now, so that's good. Because it's always helpful for people then getting into entry level, which is fantastic. So thank you very much for that. Last but not least, this is a question that normally stumps everyone on the spot. What is a book that you've read recently that you'd like to recommend? Or any book that you've read in the past couple of months? Or listen to?
See, if you asked me about my favourite book, I could tell you on the spot.
You can do that. You can do your favourite book if you'd like.
I feel like I should talk. No, you know what? I'm going to do my favourite book because it's not very well known. So many people don't know that the Studio Ghibli film Howl's Moving Castle is actually a adaptation of Diane Wynne-Jones' Howl's Moving Castle book, which is part of a 3-book trilogy. And essentially the story for the first act is the same, and then they both divert into completely different ways. And what I love about the book more so than the film is, one, it is so painfully English. It has such a dry sense of humor. It's very self-aware, and I just love the style, because even though it's technically a children's book, you get so much enjoyment out of it as an adult. And I didn't actually read it until I was in my 20s. And two, it's just because of when I read it in my life. So you have the main character, Sophie, who gets cast to be an old woman, and she's got to break the spell, but she can't tell anybody that she's under a spell. And at the beginning of the book, she's very down on herself, and she's very sort of settled in her life, and has just accepted that, you know, she's never going to go anywhere further than her stepmother's hat shop, that, you know, adventures happen to other people, and she's completely unaware of the extent of her own power. And as the story goes on, she begins to finally realize the extent that she has and the ability that she has, that she's always sort of disregarded in herself. And I read that at a time when I was sort of between college. I had done every single job that you could mention. I was a waitress, I was a shop assistant, I was an au pair for a while. I was completely and utterly lost, and just the magic of the day-to-day, it really connected me at that time. And it was actually the first audiobook I listened to for a long time ahead of my interview with Penguin. And I now have 2 copies of it. I have the copy that sits on my shelf, and I have the copy that I take in the bath with me, and it's completely dogged.
Oh, no.
And I just think, especially if you love the film, you'll love the book more. And if you've ever been somebody who's, you know, lost their way, it's such a beautiful book. And then the other 2 in the series are a lot of fun as well.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that with the podcast. That has been awesome. So I'll definitely want to read that now. That sounds great. I'm going to add that to the TBR.
You should definitely pick it up, and it's a quick read as well, because it's technically for children.
Oh, I will definitely think about picking that one up. So, it's going on the shelf with all my other books I have to read. That's all right. If not, I'll just download them in audio format. Be a good idea.
Yeah. There is an audio edition, though. I think it's abridged, which is the heartbreaking thing.
Oh no!
I don't think they've done an unabridged version of it yet. But yeah, my heart is after an unabridged version.
Oh bless. Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. You can follow Rebecca on Twitter at TWA2Becky. If you'd like to get in touch, you can get in contact through Twitter at NovelM16 and use the hashtag Slothcast, or you can send me an email at slumberingSlothBookNook@gmail.com. You can access the podcast via YouTube at Slumbering Sloth Book Nook, or you can download from Podbean and Apple Podcasts for an on-the-go experience. See you next week. Bye!